Hello, Ames Chamber of Commerce members. It's Drew Camp, Vice President at the Ames Chamber of Commerce here for what seems like it's been an eternity since we did a local public policy video update. But with the session coming back on June 3rd and the primary election coming up on Tuesday, June 2nd, we thought it valuable to come back and provide you some information as we head into the weekend. I want to first start off with one of the most recent press releases, one of the most recent proclamations that the governor made regarding the public health emergency. The proclamation permits bars, wineries, breweries, distilleries, and social and fraternal clubs to reopen yesterday, so a lot of them are opening today, with the same public health measures put in place that restaurants currently have: 50% capacity, social distancing, cleaning, and things along those lines. The proclamation also permits a June 1st reopening of additional establishments, including outdoor performance venues, casinos, bowling alleys, amusement parks, skating rinks, skate parks, and outdoor playgrounds. So you'll see those signs come down at Ames Parks facility on Monday, and those will be back open to the community. The proclamation again permits social, community, recreational, and leisure and sporting gatherings and events of more than 10 people with public health measures implemented, including limiting attendance to 50% of the venue capacity and maintaining 6 feet of distance with those attending. Pretty common things nowadays that we're all aware of that we need to be doing if we're in large groups of 10 or more. It also allows practices, games, and competitions for youth and adult baseball, softball, and individual sports such as running, biking, swimming, tennis, and golf to resume with the appropriate health measures once again put in place. One of the important things too is it extends the regulatory relief of those affected by the public health emergency to June 25th. So think of those protections that some people have gotten since March when she first made the public health emergency declaration. Those things are continued through June 25th. And one exciting thing, especially for people like me that really enjoyed this kind of thing is this time of year with the legislative session, is the session is going to be returning. The legislature will return to the Capitol on Wednesday, June 3rd, the day after the primary election. And they'll hope to wrap up the 2020 session in a matter of weeks. So do remember that the new fiscal year 2021 for the state, will start July 1st. So they only have about 3 weeks if they really want to get budgets put in place before that fiscal year starts. Yes, they can pass continuing resolutions of sorts to basically keep funding at the current level into the new fiscal year, but ideally they would obviously want to have those budgets implemented with the impacts of COVID-19 built into those. And along those lines, I want to state the fact that the Revenue Estimating Conference, which is who they are, is it's a 3-group person body, and they come up with the revenue projections that the governor and the legislature uses to formulate their budgets. And right now they're going to meet today at 1 p.m. and the governor and the legislature will have to use those numbers because they will be the lowest ones they've seen between the December, March, and now these numbers. We've yet to see projections since the COVID-19 pandemic came in. We know that it's going to be a setback of hundreds of millions of dollars. We don't know how much. The good news is that the state had nearly $1 billion, about $800 million in emergency reserves. So that's something that they can cushion that blow a little bit. But obviously, we will be feeling those the constraints of that budget with hundreds of millions of dollars being drawn back due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And that will also mean, obviously, we'll need to be advocating strongly for some of our key priorities, including the Iowa Economic Development Authority budget. On the federal side of things, there's a few things I just wanted to touch on very quickly. The Paycheck Protection program is a program that a lot of our businesses have used, and obviously it helps retain employees, and then you receive the benefits from your local lender and the SBA and the Treasury Department. It's kind of a uniform grouping and collaboration between all of them. The House yesterday passed a bill 417-1, so it had broad bipartisan support, that would give businesses, instead of 8 weeks, up to 24 weeks. And it would also extend the deadline of rehiring workers from June 30th to the end of the year. So it provides a little bit more flexibility for companies as they look at and consider the loan forgiveness piece. And along the lines of the loan forgiveness piece, it would also give small businesses the ability to spend more of the money on non-payroll cost. The current terms of the loans require recipients to use 75% of the funds on payroll and up to 25% on other costs that qualify for loan forgiveness. But the legislation would change that ratio to 60 and 40, so it gives them a little bit more flexibility to use the funding on things other than payroll, things like rents, utilities, other fixed costs like that. So while it did pass the House by a broad bipartisan vote of 417-1, we did see this morning that Marco Rubio, who chairs the Senate Small Business Subcommittee, they're a little cautious on some of the pieces that they see that could be burdensome to some people, and they want to make sure that that's not an issue. So it's not necessary that they won't necessarily rubber stamp this piece that's now moving over to the Senate for consideration next week. They might make some changes that they see necessary, but the good news is there is bipartisan support on making these improvements to make this, especially the loan forgiveness piece, a little bit more accessible, which was a huge concern for some of our businesses. Another piece of the CARES Act that's also been getting talked about a lot and looked at for a phase 4 deal is the employee retention tax credit. And what that does is it's exactly what it sounds like, is you receive a tax credit if you retain your employees. And they're looking at new proposals, and it's bipartisan as well. That's why I mention these things, because they have bipartisan support, so there's a little bit more legs underneath them than some of the other things that are being talked about. The proposal would increase the credit to 80% of qualified wages and raise the limit on each employee to $15,000 per calendar quarter per 3 months for up to 3 quarters, an increase from the current $10,000 for all calendar quarters or 12 months. The credit currently gives businesses a 50% credit for paying up to $10,000 in wages per worker. One of the big things that there'll be a little caution about is the fact that the Joint Committee on Taxation did say that it's going to cost about $160 billion through 2021. And while it will help 59 million workers, we do have to remember that over $5 trillion of debt has been taken on since March. So that's something we really need to also be looking at in a responsible manner. Another quick piece I wanted to touch on is a piece on job training, and then I'll finish up with childcare in the primary election. There is some bipartisan legislation as well in Congress about offering a refundable tax credit to help unemployed workers get retrained with new job training. Think really about the 260E program that we use so effectively with DMAC, with our large-scale industrial and business expansions. This would be something similar to that, where they would get job training towards a specific qualified goal, and then they would receive a refundable tax credit. It's very, very effective, and it's something I think is a really, really good idea for these individuals to be looking at moving forward. And then I want to touch on another critical issue for a lot of our members and a lot of families out there right now, and that's childcare. That's really been turned on its head since COVID-19 hit. And what's been really nice now is we're seeing things talked about at the federal government about how can we make improvements to the system. So our own Senator Joni Ernst, I want to make sure I give her compliments because it's very much due in this case. She's introduced a bill calling for $25 billion in funding for the Child Care and Development Block Grant in order to help the child care sector withstand the COVID-19 crisis. When combined with the $3.5 billion the CARES Act provided, it would roughly add the equivalent of 3 months of child care for all children enrolled in child care nationwide for COVID-19. So kudos to her on this. Hopefully we'll be able to get that over the finish line. That is going to be a really big deal if we're able to get that assistance into the hands of those who need it. There are some other bills that are being looked at for up to $50 billion in assistance for child care. Those are they're not bipartisan necessarily, so that's something we'll wait and see where they fall on that. We just obviously hope that there's assistance being provided in that critical sector. The last thing I wanted to touch on is, even though we've had a lot going on and we're all busy with our daily lives in this new normal, don't forget that the primary election is Tuesday, June 2nd. There's some really, really important offices up for election on both the Democratic and Republican side. Yes, these are partisan elections for the primary, but it is important to note that not only is absentee voting available and you can send in your ballot till June 1st and they have to receive it by June 8th, but you can also still do, if you would prefer, you can go to the polls from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. For those who did not partake in absentee voting, you had to have your request in at the end of last week. You will be able to go to one of 10 combined locations to limit the interaction and risk amid the COVID-19 pandemic. So while they did encourage strongly, both the Secretary of State and Auditor Martin encouraged you to do absentee voting, if you prefer to get out and vote the day of, you can certainly do that at any of the 10 locations throughout Story County from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. But just make sure you do it. It's really, really important as we move into the general election in November. So with that, I just want to say, first off, it was really good getting back and providing this information to you. It's really an important service that we provide to our members, and we really appreciate you all watching this and appreciate your engagement on the public policy side of things within the chamber. So with that, I will stop, and we'll be back next week for another update with the session actually back, with the legislature, actually back in session. So please do come back next week, and we'll have plenty more to talk about. Thanks, and have a nice weekend.